Ozone 11 is here, and I feel like we've entered a new era of mastering. I was lucky enough to test out Ozone 11 Advanced in the past week on client work, and in this video, I want to share with you my experience and thoughts on two major new features in Ozone 11 as a professional mixing and mastering engineer. For transparency's sake, iZotope did send me a copy of Ozone 11 Advanced and this t-shirt for free, but they did not ask for a video in exchange, they did not have any input in this video, and they did not get to watch this video before you do. Anything I say in this video is 100% my own honest opinions. Okay, let's jump into the DAW so I can show you Ozone 11. So here I have a pre-master from a Metalcore EP that I recently mastered for The Curse Within. These guys are from Toronto, Canada, and they're definitely one of my favorite metal bands right now. Their music is so catchy and they did a great job on the mix. I have a link to their music in the description, so be sure to give them a listen. This is Ozone 11 Advanced. As you can see, the starting screen is pretty similar to Ozone 10, but there's actually a lot of small quality of life improvements, along with several major upgrades. The most impressive new feature of Ozone 11 that I want to show you here is stem focus, which basically allows you to process only the vocals, only the drums, or only the bass, hence the name stem focus. Now, I know you're thinking, that sounds so gimmicky and that can work well. I thought the same at first, to be honest, but it actually blew my mind once I had a chance to use it on actual client work. And I'm going to show you why it's a game changer. So the stem focus mode is up here at the top. As you can see right now is full mix, which is just the default one that your any processing you do is applies to the entire input signal, the whole mix. But up here, if you go down to the next button, you have the vocals, the drums, and the bass. When you're in the vocals stem mode, for example, anything you do here, any modules you add, will only apply to the vocals in the song. So I'm going to show you by grabbing an EQ here. And if I pick a section with vocals, that chorus is so good. So what I'm gonna do here is that I'm gonna start boosting and doing some EQ moves, and then you can hear how the EQ is only applying to the vocals, but not everything else. Hopefully you can hear that as I boost and cut the frequencies, only the vocals were really affected by the EQ, and everything else remained intact, especially the guitars. This is super helpful for people like me who masters a lot of metal music because there's just so much guitar, walls of guitar, right? And the guitars are usually sitting around the same frequency range as the vocals. So usually if you do anything to the vocals, you're kind of affecting the guitars as well. It's kind of inevitable. And with the vocal stem focus mode, that's not happening anymore. And I'm going to solo the EQ so you can hear how Ozone is isolating the vocals. As you can hear, Ozone does a really good job with isolating mostly just the vocals, so anything you do with the EQ only applies to the vocals but not everything else. Now I'm going to compare the EQ moves I do here with the full mix so you can hear how much of the difference it would make with and without the stem focus for the vocals. You can hear in the full mix mode how much the EQ is changing everything else, especially the guitars. Now, some of you might say, well, the vocals are usually in the middle, so why don't you use the mid-side mode? Well, let's try that. I'm going to mid-side, and I'm applying the EQ to the mid here. So this is only affecting the mid channel. Let's compare full mix versus vocal only.
Now I have given up this life. Take me as an offering and leave the rest behind. And will I live another life? Just to close my eyes. Now I have given up this life. Take me as an offering and leave the rest behind. And will I live another life? Just to close my eyes.
Hopefully you can hear that in the full mix mode. Even though I'm applying the EQ only to the mid channel, it's still changing many other elements, especially the snare and the top end of the snare and some of the kick and even some of the cymbals, because so many of those elements are also in the mid channel. And as soon as I switched to vocal stem focus mode, the EQ boost that I did here only applied to the vocals, and it was not affecting the snare and the kick or any of the cymbals nearly as much, if at all, as when I was in full mix mode. As soon as I realized how well this works, it really started to sink in how useful stem focus will be in mastering. This will allow us mastering engineers to significantly alter the tonality of the vocals if that's what you need to do, to fix sibilant vocals easier, to add more compression or even saturation to the vocals without affecting other elements in the mix. I mean, sure, these may be achievable to a certain degree in the past, typically via mid-side processing, but it's always a struggle because vocals are often not just in the center, and there was really no easy and effective way to apply processing only to the vocals when you're working with a single stereo mix, as I show you here. There's so many other elements that's also in the center: snare, kick, and cymbals. Stem focus really does a pretty great job at identifying and isolating the vocal elements, even in a dense, chaotic metal mix like this with harsh vocals and clean vocals.
Now I have given up this life. Take me as an offering and leave the rest behind.
It's definitely not perfect, but it does a good enough job that you can apply subtle up to moderate amount of processing to it without really affecting anything else. Generally speaking, in the mastering stage, you usually don't want to alter anything too drastically anyway, and I doubt it's even possible to truly separate any single element in a stereo mix. By the way, I've put a link to Ozone 11 in the video description if you want to take a look at the product page. For someone who masters a lot of metal music like myself, stem focus gets even more useful in the drum mode. For example, I feel like the snare in this mix is poking out a little bit too much, and I want to slightly attenuate it, just so it sits better in the mix. Traditionally, you could try to apply compression in the mid channel, since that's usually where the snare is. However, you can hear that it doesn't work very well at all because there's so many other elements that also exist in the mid channel and in the same frequency ranges, like vocals, bass, kick, and some cymbals, and so on. But take a listen to what happens once I enter the drum stem mode with stem focus. You can hear that immediately Ozone 11 did a really great job on isolating the drums. And now it becomes a lot easier to fine-tune the drum transients. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this equalizer and I'm going to add a compressor. And what I want to do is I want to do split band processing on the snare. I want to separate the fundamental frequencies of the snare and the crack of the snare. So I'm going to put a band here and I'm going to take a listen and find the fundamental frequency of the snare. There you have the fundamental frequency. There's a little bit of the kick there, but that's okay. We're trying to attenuate the snare, so all we're looking for is the peak in the signal, which we're getting. And now I'm going to isolate the top end of the snare, so it's kind of the crack. And here I'm soloing this band only so I can hear. I'm not doing any compression yet. So you can hear that while there are a little bit of other elements that are bleeding into it, it's okay because we've mostly isolated the crack of the snare, because what we're looking for is the peak in the signal, so I can kind of attenuate that peak. If you look at the threshold here, you can see that the snare is very apparent. So what we can do is I'm going to lower the compressor and just to reduce that peak a little. I'm going to do the same thing to the fundamental frequencies. So now I have just lowered the thresholds enough to kind of touch that peak. So now I'm going to listen to the whole thing and do a little bit more fine tuning.
Now I have given up this life. Take me as an offering and leave the rest behind. And will I live another life?
So hopefully you can hear that the snare now is sitting much better in the mix and is kind of gluing with the rest of the elements. It's not like standing out. It's not poking out. Now once again, I'm going to switch back to the full mix mode so you can see the advantage of the stem focus. And if we look at the meter, even if I back up the threshold a little bit, you can see it's a lot harder to catch that the snare peak.
Now I have given up this life. Take me as
And now I'm going to solo these two bands so you can hear a difference.
now I have given an offering and leave.
Is bonkers how good it is at detecting and isolating that snare drum. Like even now I'm kind of like speechless every time I hear how well this works. The changes I've made so far are very subtle, but mastering is all about subtle adjustments, as I said, especially when the mix is as good as this one. Without stem focus, it's going to be a lot harder or even impossible to do this kind of split band processing only to the snare on a single stereo pre-master. The bass stem focus mode really comes in handy for fine-tuning the level and dynamics of the bass guitar when mastering a metal mix like this one. Let's say I want this mix to sound thicker and more substantial, but I don't want to change the low end of the kick at all because I like how it sounds the way it is. So what I can do here is go to the bass mode and I'll add a maximizer module. And here you can see that we have a new feature called upward compression. Upward compression, in case you're not familiar with it, is basically the opposite of regular compression, which is technically called downward compression. It's the compression you probably use all the time. While downward compression reduces the dynamic range of the audio by turning down the loud parts, upward compression does it by turning up the quiet parts. One of the advantages of upward compression is that you can get it to sound more natural and transparent compared to regular compression. You know how if you compress the drums or bass too much, it would start to sound like it's really squashed? It can be easier to avoid that with upward compression. Bobby from Raytown Productions has a great explainer video on upward compression and its usages, and I'll put the link in the description in case you want to learn more about it. Now, going back to our mix here, I'm going to apply some upward compression only to the bass stem signal, so the low end of the entire mix is more consistent and solid. Hopefully you can hear a difference there, but I'm going to exaggerate it so you can hear what it does to the mix. And if I add a bit of limiting, I can really lock that bass down too. Hopefully you can hear a difference there, and that's definitely way too bassy. I'm not actually trying to master this song right now. I'm just trying to show you what Ozone 11 stem focus can do. Having a really consistent low end is highly desirable in the modern metalcore and hardcore subgenres of metal. And Ozone 11's new stem focus and upward compression features makes it a lot easier to achieve that. Currently, the stem focus is only available in the all-in-one plugin, but not the individual plugins. I do wish that I could use stem focus in the individual plugins because sometimes I want to use the compressor module on the drum stem, but an EQ on the vocal stem. And right now, I would have to load 2 instances of the all-in-one plugin to achieve that. It's a small usability pain point for me and is certainly not a big deal. Another major new feature in Ozone 11 is that in 10 of the modules, you have not only a stereo mode, a mid-side mode, but also a transient and sustain mode. In this mode, Ozone allows you to process the transients and the sustains separately. The amazing thing is that you can use the transient and sustain mode in any of the stem focus modes, which make stem focus even more useful. For example, if I want to hear a little bit more low-end thud from the kick in this mix, I can go to the drum mode, so the processing is only on the drums, and I'm going to add an EQ, and in here I'm going to switch to transient sustain, and now I have transient selected, so I'm only affecting the transient in the drums. So I'm going to add a bend here, I'm going to solo that and you'll hear what I mean. So you can hear how it's isolating the transient of only the kick. So what I can do is I'm going to just do a little boost at the fundamental frequency of the kick. I'm going to exaggerate it a little bit more so you can hear what it does. Now, once again, I'm going to switch back to the full mix mode so you can hear how big of a difference that is. As you can hear in the full mix mode, without the transient and sustain mode enabled, the same EQ boost here is boosting a lot of the low end from the bass as well. It's muddying up the entire mix. Stamp focus is especially helpful in this case because in this mix, the bass guitar is actually occupying more or less the same fundamental frequencies as the kick's fundamental frequency. And I'm going to show you here. You can hear that they're occupying the same fundamental frequency range, but thanks to stamp focus, I can really focus on only the kick drum or only the bass, the low end of the bass guitar. Hopefully you can see how powerful Ozone 11 can be with stamp focus and the transient sustain mode. These features not only make it easier for us to do our job, but also expand our capabilities as mastering engineers by allowing us to have further control over stereo mixes. Personally, this is the kind of innovation I've always wanted to see in audio plugin development over the fixation on emulating outboard gear from decades ago. If you're wondering whether you should upgrade from Ozone 10 Advanced to Ozone 11 Advanced, in my opinion, it depends. If most of what you master is your own mixes, then I don't think you will gain a whole lot from Ozone 11 just because it does inherit a lot of the same tools from Ozone 10. I feel like you might not benefit much from stamp focus, the upward compression feature in the maximizer, or the transient slash sustain mode, since you can just go into your own mix and adjust the individual elements as needed. But if you're a mastering engineer who are actually working with single stereo mixes and not just mastering your own mixes, I absolutely think that these 3 new features alone are worth the upgrade. I've been mastering for clients for 7 years now, and these features in Ozone 11 are definitely some of the most useful mastering tools I've ever come across. That's it for the video. I have a link to Ozone 11 in the video description for those who are interested. Give this video a like and subscribe if you find it helpful. I have a few other videos on mastering plugins in case I got you on a mastering mood. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.